a lot's happened in the last 2 weeks, I guess, or I've lost track of time. But I got a few requests after we had a celebrity suicide by Sushant Singh Rajput, and that sent a wave of ripples and emotions that people reached out saying, can you talk about depression? Can you talk about suicide? So what I'm going to do this week is actually break it into two parts. The reason I'm doing that, of course, it's a very heavily intense topic, but the first part is going to just talk about how do we recognize signs of depression. And when I mean depression, I actually mean clinical depression, not the feelings or transient feelings of sadness we may experience. So that's one. And then, of course, why did that suicide impact people so much? So that's going to be what I'm going to talk about today. On Sunday, I'm going to take part two, which is really when people said, and I saw this whole outpouring on social media that reach out, my home is open, let's have tea, talk to me. I'm saying that's a great first step. But please understand that when it is severe depression, when it is suicide, you guys can be first responders. How do you recognize when someone is suicidal? How can you talk to them or start touching upon it? But again, it requires immense intervention to actually work with someone who is suicidal. So I don't want to just minimize it and say, please come and talk to someone. You can be first responders, and how can we approach that? How can we be effective first responders? That's what will happen in part two, which will be on Sunday, probably around the same time. So that said, whenever somebody says in everyday usage, I'm so depressed. Okay, and please keep bringing questions as and when. I know I got a few questions outside of, when I had shared that I'm going to do this, but please keep answering as you go along, and my friend will be the one who will read them out to me. So like I said, when somebody starts talking about depression, please understand depression, clinical depression, which is a diagnosable condition when we talk about it in mental health terms, in our training as a psychologist or a psychiatrist, is very different from those feelings of low mood or sadness. So when somebody says depressed, I will often ask, are you sad or are you depressed? Now you may wonder what the difference is, and if anything today, I want you to reflect on what is actually clinical depression. And sorry if I'm going to talk about the criteria and all of that, but it's important to, one, know what depression is, and also when to seek help. So if I look at what we as psychologists use as the criteria of diagnosing someone with depression, you need to have, and again, please pay attention to the duration, the severity, you need to have 5 of 8 symptoms. And I'll talk about those symptoms every day, nearly every day, for a period of 2 weeks. Okay, so that's the latest guideline we have. One of those 5 symptoms need to be either depressed mood or loss of interest in pleasurable activities. So one of those 5 symptoms need to be those, okay? So let it sink in. What are those symptoms? Let's talk about that. Low mood, depressed mood, nearly every day for 2 weeks. Okay, so it's not just 2 din, 3 din, it's nearly every day for 2 weeks. Markedly diminished interest or pleasure in almost all activities that you once enjoyed. So whether it was reading or listening to music or talking to friends or socializing, whatever be your activity is going to work, markedly diminished interest, again, nearly every day for 2 weeks. Significant weight loss or weight gain, so which means either a complete lack of appetite or a lot of overeating or an increase in appetite. Again, nearly every day. Slowing down of thought. People start noticing that you seem a little slow, and of course when we say a thing like psychomotor retardation, you may feel like you don't want to get out of bed. There may be more slowness in your activities, which is again observable by others, again nearly every day. Fatigue, loss of energy, tiredness without exerting effort. Again, it's not like I've come back from a marathon and I'm tired. No, I've done nothing at home, but I'm still feeling tired. I wake up not fresh. I go to sleep tired nearly every day. Diminished ability to think or to engage in effective decision making. that again is nearly every day. Feeling inappropriate, a sense of low self, excessive inappropriate guilt, lot of negative thinking, again, nearly every day. And what makes depression, again, something which demands attention is recurrent thoughts of suicide, of death, without a specific plan or a plan in action or figuring out a plan. So whenever we assess somebody who comes in with a mood disturbance, we have to talk about suicidality. Again, now you may often think, when I'm talking about these 8 symptoms and I'm saying pick 5 of these, you may say, yeah, but I have that. Again, I'm having you reflect on, is it interfering with your daily functioning, with your continuing to go to work, getting to school, just taking family responsibilities, doing your personal, interpersonal, vocational, social responsibilities? Is it causing significant distress in that way? Again, some medical conditions may lead to some of those symptoms, so we have to keep that aside. You can't be, you have to keep aside anything which, a medical condition which may be leading to those signs and symptoms. So for example, if it's chronic pain and it's leading to fatigue, we have to kind of make sure that we're making that differential diagnosis. So again, it needs to lead to significant clinical distress in that sense. Okay. Depressed people can also demonstrate excessive irritability, anger, mood swings, outrages, brooding, obsessive rumination, a lot of thinking, and usually that thinking is more negative in nature. More like it's affecting the sense of self. I'm worthless, I'm a failure, I feel hopeless. They could have a lot of anxiety, phobias, worry for themselves or their loved ones, or excessive pains and symptoms that they may also feel. So it could be a headache, it could be gastrointestinal issues, it could be stuff like that also. So okay, the question becomes, am I sad or depressed? What is the difference between depression and sadness? So the reason I'm saying it, please, again, maybe you will need to reflect on what people are feeling. Given that the primary symptom of depression is sadness, it's honestly hard to make a distinction between the two psychological states. But depression is more than just sadness. And it's not simply just that, oh, I'm very sad compared to less sad. That's one hallmark feature, but you have to have those other symptoms that we spoke about again to characterize it as depression. The duration needs to be important. Again, nearly every day, for 2 weeks. That again is something which needs to be taken into account. And that individual's ability to function in life. So if you're feeling incapacitated, unable to fulfill your roles, unable to think straight, unable to feel anything, again, that's more depression than sadness. Sadness is something which again is a normal emotion, right? We are going to feel sad at some point in life. Most of us may just be feeling that ever since the pandemic hit, with some ups and downs, some variabilities when it comes to a job loss, a loss of a loved one, a breakup. All of that will kind of warrant a sad phase in your life, but again, look at the duration, the clinical distress that it causes. The biggest distinguishing factor, and that's the one I keep telling people about, is depression is debilitating. People feel helpless, hopeless, sad for no reason. There could definitely be no trigger. So when we look at somebody who says, but oh, look at how that person was so rich, was famous, had everything going for him. What was the reason why he committed suicide or that he's depressed? Again, please remember, those objective factors may have nothing to do with how they are feeling. It's that lens, that filter, the way in which we interpret the world, the way we feel that void, that lack of meaning in our lives, that lack of purpose, has nothing to do with what's happening on the exterior. So they may, like we say, that person has everything to be happy about, but yet they are debilitatingly feeling sad. So remember, and there were questions and I'll keep answering, the quality of our lives depend on the quality of our mind. So that's the first part about depression I'm going to talk about, that it stems from how we are thinking or perceiving. a situation, we interpret it in our terms, and that's where, when that negative thinking cripples us, is when the depression sets in. So if anything, remember that bit as well. With sadness, you may feel down in the dumps for a day or two, but you will still enjoy your favorite things. You may still watch your favorite show, eat food, hang out maybe with your friends. But for somebody with depression, again, that loss of pleasure is pretty significant. That loss of interest is pretty significant in that way. You're still able to eat, you're still able to remain motivated to do things, you may still take small steps to doing what you want to do. Again, with depression, it's associated with a serious disruption in sleeping, in eating patterns, as well as not wanting to get out of bed almost all day. In sadness, you may regret saying something to someone. You may feel bad about it, but in depression, again, that sense of self-worth diminishing, that self-diminishing negative thought pattern tends to be, again, the distinguishing pattern. So it may be blown out of proportion, because that's the extent to which that person is thinking negatively. So when we say that their reality is distorted, or their way of thinking is distorted, that's what we mean. It's just something which is their own individual way of looking at things. Fine. And again, I don't want to, and for those of you who worked with me, I take suicidality very, very seriously. So if someone even jokingly mentions, life's not worth living, that person knows I will ask more I will be, okay, you can't be joking about this. But self-harm, suicidality, somebody with sadness may not experience, but it doesn't arise from non-depressive sadness. Yet, I will say, having worked with people who've survived suicides, it can also be an impulsive act. So it may not be that premeditated, planned way in which we often see in depression, but maybe there's a low that hits. In a moment of impulse, people can also take that step, which is why I'm saying, can we arrest that sadness soon enough so that we are doing something and not letting it spiral into a negative plan, negative path? How can I help someone who's depressed? Please know, and I know what I'm going to end with when I come to the end of at least this episode. Depression is serious, but it's also treatable. And I will say that again. It's a serious condition, but it's also treatable. And one of the things is that, we hesitate to seek help, and that's the bit that I'm going to come about. But it gets in the way of everyday functioning, causing tremendous pain and hurt to not just us who suffer it, but also to the loved ones who we may be living with as well. Again, when you're living with someone who's depressed, it can be difficult. You may yourself experience feelings of helplessness, despair, frustration, anger, fear, guilt. You may feel yourself responsible for, I want to fix this person's problem, or I'm responsible for his or her happiness. So you may have your own emotions as well. Please understand, these feelings are also normal. It's not easy dealing with someone who is depressed, and of course, if you neglect your own health, it can become overwhelming. The reason I'm not, in a way, talking about what someone with depression can do to get better, I'm going to save that for our next topic. But the reason I'm saying I want this conversation just to be a way of increasing awareness around this issue. Okay, so understanding depression in a family, in a way, depression affects a person's will to live. So don't underestimate the seriousness of depression in that way. It drains a person's energy, their optimism, their motivation. So you can't just say, come on, use your willpower to get out of it. They just can't snap out of that. And that, in a way, places even more burden on them. So in a way, I'm starting to have you reflect on what to say, what not to say, which again, I'll elaborate on in our second episode. This is one bit where when somebody who's depressed, their family member comes and says, he can be so mean and nasty, I just don't get it. I'm trying to do my best for him, but he just doesn't get it. Depression makes people snap or get angry. One of the things that it does is it stops that emotional connect to build even with the person you love. Somebody is so caught up in their own emotions that gets snapped. So even the one they love the most, they lash out at. It's common for depressed people to say hurtful things or to lash out in anger. The one thing that I often tell people or put that in perspective, saying, remember, that's the depression talking. It's not the person you love. So it's not XYZ who's saying it, but it's that depression which is making him or her say all this. So please don't take it personally, empathize. Put yourself in their shoes and look at it and say, I see how hurt he is or how upset he is with his life situation, for instance. That said, I wouldn't want the caregiver to get burnt out. Whoever is depressed and is exhibiting these symptoms needs to do something about it, otherwise the relationship suffers. So when I'm saying empathize, I'm not saying that's the stop. I'm saying empathize, but say, okay, can we talk about this? Can we make this better for you and for us in our relationship? So please, again, don't confuse the diagnosis with the person. We are good at hiding things. We are good at putting ourselves behind facades and smiling faces, and very commonly we'll say, how are you? Oh, I'm okay, when inside it may be a whole different story. Hiding the problem won't make it go away, whether it's you who's depressed and your family member doesn't want to acknowledge it, or it's you who's hiding a family member's depression. It doesn't help. It doesn't help to make excuses. Depression doesn't go away if you cover up, you lie about it, or you live in denial about it. You are just affecting the quality of your life and your family's life as well. One of the things, especially parents of depressed kids will say, oh, he's so lazy, so unmotivated, lies in bed all day, has no sleep routine. When you're suffering from depression, when you're experiencing, just getting out of bed may seem like an exhausting thing to do, or they may want to do things, but again, it's impossible to put it into action. Having patience, that said, is important, where you can be a partner to your loved one recovery. Take those small steps, take those baby steps, and again, patience, kindness go a long way. The one thing, and you've heard me say this before, for me, my worst nightmare is having somebody on my caseload who commits suicide or attempts it. It's not easy. But the one thing I've learned is you can do your best to be there, but you can't fix someone else's problem or someone else's depression. As much as we want to be, superheroes and, knights in shining armor, you can't rescue someone from depression if they don't want to. So you cannot fix the problem for them. You cannot feel guilty that they're depressed and that you're accountable for it. If they, let's say, put the blame on you, you're not responsible for their happiness either. You can try and influence, you can add to all of those variables or try and take away the pain. But if they don't want to see it, there is a wall that is going to come in between you and that person. While you can offer love and support and unconditional presence, ultimately, please remember, recovery is in the hands of that person who is depressed. And by recovery, I mean seeking help, seeking mental health professionals support, seeking the support system of their loved ones. They need to be able to guide their recovery process, and we'll talk about that as well. How do you recognize signs and symptoms in a loved one? So a lot of people said, but I don't know when to see whether my loved one is depressed or not. Again, remember, family, friends, colleagues, office workers are the first line of defense for someone who's in that fight against depression. You may be able to pick up signs and symptoms that the person who's going through may not. So when you offer to talk about it or when you intervene, and I know a lot of us just hesitate to talk about it, right? What if I put ideas in that person's mind about self-harm? Again, there is a lot of myths and a lot of preconceived notions we operate from, which in a way make us fearful of reaching out to that loved one. So that's why I'm dedicating a whole new separate topic to that one. You may notice those symptoms first, but just to know that someone cares is enough for that person to take that first step to recovery. Again, because with depression, it's almost like you're seeing the world with these dark glasses in broad daylight. You know, everything seems negative, bleak, hopeless. They feel helpless. So before it spirals into something which may compromise their cooperation with recovery, it's best to pick those signs up. How do you pick those signs? So the biggest one is doesn't seem interested in things that they enjoyed doing earlier. Lost interest in work, hobbies, other pleasurable activities, intimacy in couples, withdrawn from friends, family, and other social activities. So that's the first one in which you can recognize saying, hey, something's amiss. You used to enjoy doing that. What happened? Expresses a very bleak outlook in life. What's the point? I don't care. What difference will it make? They are uncharacteristically sad, snappy, irritable. Their threshold to take things kind of go down. They're short-tempered, critical of others, of themselves. The blame starts. They're moody. They talk about feeling helpless or hopeless, or what's the point? Again, we may notice somatic symptoms, bodily aches and pains such as headaches, stomach problems, back pain, again complaints of feeling excessively tired. Sleeps less than usual or oversleeps. So a lot of times people will try and escape feeling sad and depressed by sleeping more. So if you're noticing someone sleeping more, don't think, oh good, you're getting your 9 to 10 hours of sleep. No, 9 to 10 hours isn't healthy either. But if they're excessively sleeping, avoiding going for tasks, procrastinating, not taking decisions, that again is something you want to watch out for. Again, they're not dieting, but they're eating less or they're overeating, because a lot of times, how many of us have resorted to emotional eating where when we are sad, depressed, anxious, we tend to look for comfort food, and that food is generally, we know, all the fried, carb-laden, sugary foods that we eat. They start drinking more or start abusing drugs, prescription drugs, painkillers, whatever be their recreational drug of choice, or their drinking pattern goes up, because that's the way they like numbing their pain. It makes me relax, it makes me feel good. And what happens as it goes, every day passes, you start feeling worse, so you need more of those substances to start feeling better. So when you start noticing those patterns, please again become alerted to that. Now, that bit about why did Sushant Singh Rajput's suicide affect me so much? And the reason I said affect me and not shake me up is because I got a barrage of messages that day. And I want to read out some because it goes to show, I want you to reflect on what goes on with that. So I'll just read it out verbatim. I'm not going to take names, but I'm going to read this out. News like this sometimes just takes the lid off and brings back memories. I'm just feeling so grateful to have found you and for having had you to help me when you did. I was suicidal when I met you, but I pulled through, and how? Half the battle was won when I entered that room. I felt it in my heart. Thank you will never sum it up, but words are all I have. So here's a person who successfully recovered from having that debilitating mood condition which had that person be suicidal. It was a sense of victory, a sense of courage, saying, that it reminded me of where I was, but look how far I've come. So it was a successful, courageous win over a mental illness. Or the other spectrum, whenever I hear all these sad stories, my old buried feelings of sadness resurface and I feel myself go down a negative spiral. So that's one. I just wanted to tell you that this death of Sushant has kind of affected me. One, on the front, that he's quite relatable, comes from similar academic and cultural backgrounds and his interest in the sciences. The other front is it has opened in my mind an old case of suicide of one of my close friends in college, which I had shut down somewhere. I would definitely want to know more about depression, inferiority complex, insecurities, and things leading to suicidal tendencies and what should be the path. Shutting down, repressing, burying our head in the sand, denying the fact that we have repressed some bits of us which cause pain is one of the reasons why something like this rakes up old unresolved, unfixed wounds. Okay, so when this person asked inferiority complex, insecurities, go back again, and my thread of conversations ever since we've started doing these series is it's the way you're thinking. So that self-critical thought, I'm worthless, I'm useless, life is not worth living, I can never get this right, I'm a failure, I'm a nobody compared to, look at my friends, they're doing so much better, look at where I am. When we have those kinds of constant thought patterns or habitual ways of thinking, or our beliefs are like that, we will tend to feel that way. So why is it that someone can cope so well and continue to see this as just an incident that happened and give herself a pat on the back for recovering? Some others, when that work lies unaddressed, it tends to rake up. Things like this tend to rake up. But it's not just that. Is depression contagious? Can a mental health condition be contagious? That's what I'm going to talk about. As if we haven't had enough of one contagious condition, I'm now talking about whether depression is contagious. So you know that if somebody who's got a flu, as we all know these days, whether it's a bacterial or a viral infection, we are bound to get it. But what about mental health and mood? Can depression be contagious? Yes and no. Depression can't be contagious, so get that, it can't be contagious in the same way the flu is, but our emotions and our moods can spread. So whenever, for those of us who go out into the parks and are doing our morning runs and walks, and you see those aunties and uncles doing that laughing yoga, whatever they call it, does it not bring a smile? Or when you're sitting with a friend and you're laughing and your friend's laughing, does that not lighten up your mood? Or when there is constant negative bickering and gossip in your workplace, when it's constant, does that not get to you? So that's what I mean, that tends to get contagious. So in a way, moods can be contagious. So another question that I got was, I'm not able to get over the recent film star suicide case. Keep watching his videos, keep searching for new details about him, keep relating my personality and pains with his, keep admiring him for his brilliance, have spent every single night sleepless after that. Though I have been facing downs in life recently, I never felt this low. I cry late in the night, in the shower, as if I have lost someone very near. Where are things heading, ma'am? So this is again a question that I got. Why is this person feeling so horrible? Let me talk about that. So we know, and I seriously, if anything, this should be the takeaway. It's called the social contagion theory or the group contagion theory. What it all comes down to is how this spreads, and again, some studies indicate that it can happen in many ways. Think back, how many of us found our news from social media, Facebook, Insta, whatever else about Sushant Singh Rajput? We constantly were looking at the news, constantly looking at news feeds on our social media. It's that social comparison, and I want you to pay attention that when you're scrolling through social media, you are going to determine your own worth and feelings based on what you see there. So you may compare yourself with someone who's in pain, who's talking about separation and loss and grief and anxiety. And then especially with those with negative thinking patterns, can be sometimes detrimental to your own mental health. So while we may associate, we may say, yeah, I feel like that too, but think about what it does to you after you've done scrolling. Have you taken action and said, you know what, I feel like that too, but let me take charge, what can I do about it? But that's how that contagion spread. We only look for those pieces of news where we will compare our sense of worth and feelings, especially if they are negative to someone, and that's when that spiral starts coming about. Like that other person said, I could relate to him, similar backgrounds. We emotionally interpret things even in the absence of non-verbal cues, but just based on what we read or what we know about that person. Again, that's what it sends to our brain. So especially with the ambiguity of the internet, and so if you clicked on one post about Sushant Singh Rajput, of course your newsfeed will be all about it. Why did he do it? Nepotism, he was depressed. I mean, there is so much analysis, his therapist is being asked to speak about. That's what plays on our brain. We may not pick on it, we may not realize it, but like that girl said, I constantly keep looking for news like that. That's one of the things I'm going to request you, is to please stop doing that, because that emotional contagion, we may not be aware of it, but it does spread. Empathy. Now, if you're a highly sensitive person, if you are able to sense someone else's pain, you are going to again feel that sadness or that depression whenever somebody is talking about it. So if you're overly focused, and let me put myself in his shoes, you are again more likely to experience those symptoms. Who is susceptible to catching those mood disturbances? Again, think back to the questions I've been asked. Old wounds have resurfaced. So if you've had a history of depression or other mood disorders unresolved still, you are likely going to feel triggers like this come up and rake those wounds up. So means something needs to be worked at a deeper level with you. You have a history or a family history or a genetic predisposition. So again, people who've had parents who are depressed are likely to again be depressed, not just solely by the genetic predisposition, but also how that parenting style would have influenced their upbringing, what they have seen growing up as kids. So that also in a way we unconsciously take on. If you were raised by a parent, so I've said that, or when you were a child, so again that's one. When you're experiencing a major life disruption, like that girl said, feeling depressed because again going through a major life depression or a separation, that is going to overwhelm you further. So when you're already emotionally vulnerable, and think back to again these last 3 months, how many of us have felt emotionally vulnerable? Our threshold for coping may actually be low, and things like this spiral out of context. We seek high levels of reassurance. So when we're dependent on others, calm me down, talk to me, make me feel better. When you don't develop your own coping resources, your own ways of coming back to life, that's when you are more prone, because you're not finding your own way out. You're again cognitively more vulnerable. If you're somebody who hasn't figured out what causes the depression, how to deal with it, what goals am I setting to recover, but we're only looking at ourselves from a cognitively vulnerable victim point of view, we are not going to recover. The biggest one, online friends, acquaintances, social media posts. Researchers are actively now looking more, when we're looking at emotional contagion, on how these things spread. So look back again, how many people, I was a very silent bystander to the outpouring of whatever was going on with Sushant Singh Rajput, and I could see people in distress. But then what did it do to everybody? So that's the bigger one that I want to ask. Did it make you seek help if you were feeling vulnerable? Did it put things in perspective, or did it make you feel worse? So answer that for yourself. In a research study, and I as a psychologist, I will use research study because sometimes it helps. This group of researchers took a sample size of about 7 lakh social media, Facebook posts. They did an experiment, and they found that when less positive posts were displayed on a news feed, people posted less positive themselves. They posted more negative stuff. The reverse was also true. If they saw more positive posts, they actually posted positive. So think back to again what you've been reflecting in the past few weeks and months, or what you've been, maybe you haven't posted much, but what you take away, is it? So that was again a very interesting study that I found, that they said emotional states can be transferred through emotional contagion, through posts, through non-verbal cues, through what we read. It can happen without direct interaction with people, and in the complete absence of non-verbal cues. What I'd like you to reflect on, and I've said a lot, and the reason I'm not talking about what should depressed people do, because I want you to first reflect on your own emotional state, saying where are we at? Sad, depressed, happy, purposeful, hopeful, helpful, helpless? Where are you at? We know depression is treatable, and that's the reason I'm going to talk about suicide on Sunday. We know depression is treatable. We know it affects our quality of life. We know it's serious. The taboo is still there. to address mental health, and that still persists. And that's what I want us to talk about actually today, and I want you to reflect on. Like I said, every time there's a suicide, I am a silent bystander of what goes on. People cry, we console, we lament, we grieve, we move on, we promise to be there for our loved ones. We don't know how to do that, but we move on until another one happens. So why should a celebrity suicide wake us up when there are people around us who need help? If we truly mean that, I want people to start destigmatizing mental health. Start talking about the normalcy in procuring mental health services. I don't know how many times I've had to speak to loved ones. I'm not a pill pusher. I generally don't recommend psychiatric medications. If I feel it's needed, I have nothing against it. But how many times have I had to convince a loved one, not the person, the loved one, for why psychotropic medications are needed? Why is it that a medication for diabetes or a thyroid dysfunction is okay, but not for a mental health disorder? So start normalizing it. That's half the time I'm just building awareness, destigmatizing it. I've been asked, should I disclose the fact that I have a panic disorder, I have a mood disorder to an employer? Will my chances of a promotion be affected? Will my marriage prospects be affected? Stop judging people when we are disclosing. It takes a lot of courage to disclose the fact that we've courageously fought or are fighting or are resolving a mental health issue. The bigger one, re-script the narratives when we talk about people seeking therapy. There's one very good one for psychologists. Itna therapy karte ho, you must be also going half. We've heard psychologists are also half mad, So that's what I commonly hear. I don't know if that's true or not. That's for you to tell. I'm not crazy. I'm not weak. I can use my willpower to get better when clearly more is needed. If it was just a matter of willpower, I wish that was true, but sometimes you need that intervention to boost that willpower up, to make it sustainable, to have you see that not everything you're seeing is that dark colored. You just have to take those glasses off, and sometimes it needs that little bit of support. Please don't see seeking help as a sign of weakness. See it as a sign of recovery, of rehab, of owing yourself a better quality life, an optimum quality of life. It's not a sign of weakness. I have no qualms in admitting that I suffered, and I honestly suffered. I don't like using the word suffering. I suffered from depression 12 years ago. I was on meds. I sought therapy. I knew what worked, what didn't. All I knew was that I wanted meaningful, purpose-driven life. I learned well. So it's been 12 years. And if you want to call it, I am a rehabilitated person in that sense. Please reflect, bring to awareness, take action. Like I said, I know depression is painful, and that statement which I love, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. That pain can be treated, which is why when it's not treated and it's lying just like that, do those suicidal impulses come about. Shishir, you raised a point on Facebook because you posted openly. I'm going to talk about that. You said right to life includes right to die with dignity. Then why is suicide demonized? That made me think, and that of course warrants a whole separate discussion. I know, I understand where you're coming from. I've heard it from you many times before. But I think I do want to address that when we talk next. And then of course, Jaskaran, you did write something, there's no such thing. Our bodies break down sometimes when we are 90, sometimes before we are even born, but it always happens and there's never any dignity in it. You can live with dignity, you can't die with it. What I'm trying to say is there are such diverse viewpoints about living with dignity, dying with dignity, moralistically driven religious agendas. There are so many different ways of looking at this. I am no one to demonize anything or to pass a moral judgment. Every person has their own battles, and that's what I want to talk about when I talk about this concluding part this Sunday, is honestly how to talk to someone who is depressed, who is suicidal. In other words, how can we become effective first responders so that we ourselves feel better about going and talking to someone, because half the times it's our own inhibitions, our own fears, what to say, what not to say. We often botch it up, I'll be very honest. So those are the things. Please don't take it lightly. Like I said, you can be there for someone to take that first step towards treatment and therapy and recovery, but don't take it on yourself to pull yourself out, pull that person out. So that said, we are going to talk about this on Sunday, most likely at 11:30, but I'm going to announce that later. Please reflect. Please start talking about mental health. Please start destigmatizing. It takes one person, it takes a ripple effect. Let's start talking about it more openly and with a lot of awareness, so that we do create a better space for ourselves and our loved ones. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and I'll see you guys on Sunday. Bye.